So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this roundtable. I'm Massoud Sharifi, a sociologist and a member of research team of the So Close project. It's my privilege and honor to moderate this first panel. Our topic for this panel is the legal and social factors and practices of inclusion. Before we begin this panel, I want to thank the organizer of this event, the So Close team, and especially Ana Maria and Lily. And let me also thank Javier Rodrigo and Ainhoa Flecha for the great work they have done and they are doing as director of the So Close. Many thanks also to Norwegian House of Research and Innovation for hosting the event. As I just mentioned, this roundtable is about economic, legal, and social factors and practices of inclusion. We are going to hear from 5 speakers from 5 leading projects in this regard: Focus, Matilda, Protect, Sirius, and Sirius, and welcoming spaces. The first part of this session will be dedicated to the presentation of each speaker. Then in the second part, we will have the opportunity to ask questions, discuss, and share knowledge and experiences on the issues raised. I would like also to point out that each speaker has 10 minutes to introduce himself or herself, the project he or she represents, and the results of the project. And we will be listening to all the presentation before we begin our question period. I would first like to start with the presentation of the Focus project. Peter McDonagh from Q4 Public Relations is going to discuss dynamic integration, the reality and way forward. Thank you, Peter, for being here today, and the floor is yours. Please.
And I will start a stopwatch to try and stay on time. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being here today. As you've been told, I'm here representing the Focus project. So we are a large and a diverse 3-year project, which has become a 3.5-year project because of COVID, obviously, interfering with just about everything. And we're covering many areas in relation to dynamic integration. And because the brief for today is to try and avoid doing too much on findings and to try and focus very specifically on policy outcomes, I'm going to try and respect that with one exception, which is that our policy recommendations make absolutely no sense unless I explain at least some of what the research has said, because we have taken quite a broad approach. This is who we are. Our wonderful leaders based out of Copenhagen is the Psychosocial Reference Center of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and divided between research, practice, policy, and implementing partners. And these are our partners who've been doing practical things for us in the field, which I will explain. This seems appropriate in the context of this morning's discussion, and in the context of, particularly as it was explained to us, why our call existed, why we got funded, where the commission was. That if we remember back to 2014, 15, 16, the rhetoric of the time and the predictions of the time, it was all about a wave, and it was all about a wave that was going to crash over Europe, and it was going to change everything. We saw in relation to the Brexit referendum, and in the rise of populism, or a new phase of populism in many of our countries. We saw predictions that this was something that was going to profoundly change the nature of European society. Now, fundamentally, it hasn't. And that is one of our big findings, because we have concentrated, our work has been concentrated on Syrian refugees or Syrian beneficiaries of international protection, because obviously it includes people who are still in the process, from the post-2015 2015 period. And our various of our members have made the point to me in recent days that if we compare the language between this new wave, which is bigger, more rapid, more dramatic than the last time Vladimir Putin and his allies caused a wave of migration to Europe, there's a lot to understand there. There's first of all the fact that quite clearly we are more welcoming of our closer neighbours who look like us and share a broad religious tradition. But there's more to it than that. And one of the things which we think comes out of our research is that if you think integration is going to be easy just because they're white and Christian, you don't understand integration. Because actually the factors apply across it, with one exception, which is that the really very important issue of racism is less prevalent when they're white European Christians, but it's still there. And particularly if you remember back to if you're as old as I am and you therefore remember the pre and post accession period and the dialogues at the time and the predictions and the Polish plumber, which sunk the European Constitution in France, etc., the discrimination and racism extends beyond. Start at the basics. This is the EU's definition of what we're trying to do. It's dynamic integration. This has been this is lifted from the Commission's website. This has been the definition of integration for nearly 20 years. It's central to every migration and integration policy since then. It's all over the recent action plan, which is itself a very interesting document, and it is one that we have spent a lot of time studying. And in our final 6 months, a lot of our work is based around trying to produce stuff which is relevant and useful to what's in that, and in particular to point to challenges. Better move on. Our research project is about exploring in a European context acceptance and reality in relation to two-way dynamic integration. We know what we say we want to do, but are we doing it? It's a very interesting thing. I would encourage you to download some of our very recent deliverables. For the first time, surveys have been done on both the socioeconomic and socio-psychological factors in 4 countries, including the largest recipients of Syrian refugees in the Middle East, the largest recipients in Europe, and in Croatia, which is a transit community. Parallel work done with arriving and receiving communities in the same places, same cities, concentrations of refugees, concentrations obviously of the receiving community, quantitative and qualitative, with over 5,000 participants. Number one, most important finding, as far as we are concerned, is that integration, this war of civilizations that was predicted 8 years ago, isn't happening. Of course it's not happening. And in fact, we believe that there is evidence to say that integration is at least asserted as a normative value within Europe, with over 80% of both communities, when given different options for what is their preferred way of moving forward, they choose integration over assimilation or separation, which is effectively the retention of the original culture. And that is a very, very important starting point. It's a very encouraging starting point. And it gives us a big lesson about the rhetoric of 8 to 10 years ago. But, and this is the big but, while the arriving community accepts its responsibility as active participants in this process, and very much it does, and flying in the faces of most of the populist rhetoric of the time, the receiving community accepts the idea of integration, but is very passive about it. And it places the responsibility on institutions. So even amongst people who are very welcoming of refugees in a place like Sweden or in Germany, they tend to say this should be done and they should do it rather than they get involved. And in truth, all of the major practice gaps flow, we think, from that as an insight. Socioeconomic factors, persistent institutional barriers. What is remarkable about it in a lot of this is that how little has changed. How much of the literature from before the major Syrian migration to Europe is still exactly relevant, that it has not fundamentally changed the dynamics. Duration of residence permits, language requirements for training in further ed, which is a huge problem. Language supports, particularly outside of the reception period. Family reunification, recognition of qualifications. Overqualification is a persistent problem, preventing the arriving community from from fully realizing its integration potential. Access to labour market for women, housing quality and cost. And receiving members have significantly incorrect perceptions about the socioeconomic position of the arriving community members, as in they think they're more dependent than they are. They have a sense of them as being more vulnerable and marginal than they are. In terms of the socio-psychological factors, which is a very new dimension of our work, there's strong support for the established psychological characteristics of what aids or hinders socio-psychological integration, which I can go into in questions if somebody wants to ask about that one. The arriving community is very positive towards the receiving community. However, the receiving community is moderate to positive, except where their economic situation is weaker, and then they tend to be neutral. So in particular in, 2 minutes, particularly when in Croatia and in Jordan. Intergroup contact is very infrequent, of low quality, especially for the receiving community. Perception of threat is not high, but differ between communities. Perception of discrimination, low in quantitative, but it comes out when you do it in qualitative research. How to bring, a major part of our work is is the practice stream, which is how do you bring together best practice and make it accessible and useful to the diverse community of practice. We've had a very evolved process of co-creation with organizations, ongoing series of engagements, practice case studies, implementation guidance, which means that our outputs are almost completely different from what we promised when we did the DOA, because that's what co-creation is about. It has to be relevant to now. We've brought it together into a thing we call the focus approach, which is how do you systematically incorporate within the design, evaluation, implementation of integration practices, what are the most effective ways of encouraging dynamic integration. We would say, in terms of getting serious about dynamic integration, I've made that point. Programs which facilitate quality in intergroup contact need to become central to integration work. It's not just the quantity, it's the quality of the interaction that is the key difference, which I think will fit with a lot of the work which will be coming up here. Core institutional barriers remain critical. Information policies, basically, people want to know more about the current situation of migrants. Racism and discrimination are cross-cutting issues and should be addressed in program development. They're simply there and they have to be addressed. Finally, in relation to the research policy practice gaps, ongoing development of accessible resources are required for the sector. It's a very diverse sector of policy and practice. People find the research very inaccessible. They don't have the resources to engage with it. The more initiatives like the website for integration, etc., and the further they can go, the better. And then there's a lot in relation to how this fits in relation to funding, because AMIF funding is the single biggest driver of integration practice in Europe by a distance, or as we say in Ireland, by a country mile. As in, it's just really important. And changing the way in which that is done will filter down to a very local level. We did a very detailed study with policymakers and practice makers at local, regional, national and European level, and that comes through. I will leave the rest of that and just say that sums up where we are. Slightly over time, but not much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No. Thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. The second presentation, this session will be on the Mathilde project. The speaker will be Jussi Lane from the University of Eastern Finland, who will talk about migrant inclusion as a multi-level and multi-dimensional process. We'd like to hear from you, Mr. Lane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is indeed Jussi Laine. I come from the University of Eastern Finland, which locates in Eastern Finland. Hence the name where, of course, excuse me, I'm going to get rid of this, where the situation, of course, is also very hectic at the moment regarding the discussion that we had today, this morning, regarding the situation in Ukraine. And my presentation was made, I think, 2 days before the actual aggression started. So I will not really make too many notes on that, but maybe in the discussion today we can return to this, because there's an important element into this, and which I wish to say publicly here, is that there are many people in Russia who do not agree with Mr. Putin's aggression with Ukraine. And this is very obvious and evident in the countries neighboring Russia, such as in Finland. Now that the planes, the flights are no longer operating, the trains are absolutely full of Russian citizens escaping their own country to the neighboring countries and to the rest of Europe. Perhaps we can return to this discussion in the discussion. Here I'm representing Matilda. I'm the project coordinator of the project, and the presentation has been a collective process. In particular, I received a lot of help from Stefan Cordell, Marika Gruber, and Ayhan Kaya, but also many others. Simone here is also part of Matilda, even though he's here representing a serious project. Very briefly, what we do, I took the task assignment very literally, and I focus on the policy implications of our work. Having said that, there's still a lot going on in our project. The fieldwork is still ongoing, so what you see today is not going to be the final word, but I'm very grateful of this opportunity to say a little bit about our first implications. So what are we really going to do? We've tried to promote the change in perception and practices regarding migration. We are trying to provide an alternative narrative to the way migration is commonly talked about in Europe at the moment and in the past. And perhaps, indeed, the current situation will actually help us to do that. What we are trying to do, we are focusing on rural and remote areas where migration can indeed provide an impetus, the fertile ground, as Madame Thun, I believe, was talking about this morning. These are areas, maybe I should be going further. These are areas which are commonly associated with negative development spiral. Eastern Finland, where I come from, is a very good example of this. A region of a country that has been losing population for a long time, making public services, all the services for that matter, more difficult and more costly to organize and implement. These are the regions who would really benefit from incoming migration to supplement the development of these regions. So we are trying to revitalize these regions, to foster that creative, fertile ground in order for further development to take place. In our regions, Russians indeed have been the major incoming group. So the situation is very interesting to see how this is going to develop in the future. But as you saw from the map, I didn't really introduce the project as a whole. We have 13 different case studies in various parts of Europe. I tend to speak from the region that I know very well, but we have a lot of expertise from other regions as well. Why to focus on these regions is also that there's an opposite trend that is becoming very noticeable at the same time. And this is something that has been fueled by the COVID-19 pandemic. The interest to remote and rural areas. A lot of people have been moving back or reinventing these places, escaping the urban areas for their second homes or what have you, not maybe the place of birth where their parents live, to work from a distance. There is potential to rethink these areas and the potential that they have for the regional development. And we try to incorporate the incoming migrants into this process. And it is indeed something that needs to be co-created. The gentleman before me spoke very wisely about the integration. We focus on integration. We also focus on, or I prefer to talk about inclusion and the actual impact of that. Recreating the we together rather than opposing who's local, who's native, who doesn't belong there. Very briefly, and as said, our fieldwork is still ongoing, so this is not the final word. Language, of course. This is something that we know already before this project, but it remains a very key element for the economic and social inclusion. And we need to take more efforts into this direction. It affects the time spent in the destination country through the exposure and learning by doing. The language does not need to be the main language if we think about this in a state-centric way. For example, the other case study region in Finland is Ostrobothnia in the Swedish coast, which is a Swedish-speaking region. And it's very interesting to think about the selection of language. Some migrants move to Finland and they do not study the Finnish language, that they prefer to learn Swedish language because that opens completely different opportunities. Not just within Finland, but in the neighboring countries and elsewhere as well. So this has been an interesting situation. It also, of course, relates to or enhances the upward social mobility, advancing your status within the society. This is not simply a language question. Learning the language is, of course, not enough. This is not the claim that I'm making here. A lot of information, a lot of migrants, incoming migrants, they simply lack a lot of knowledge of how the local society operates. And efforts needs to be taken to that extent. And here we very much notice the gender gap in the rural areas. So the attention should be in particular spent on women. Discrimination, xenophobia, racism, as was already mentioned, remains a major obstacle and something that should be alleviated by highlighting positive examples of incoming migration and the positive impact that migrants create to the local society. We know many of them, but oftentimes in the media and in the public debate, we tend to focus on the negative examples. I'm rushing. I'm sorry, we can return to this. Labor, again, remains a major point, and it's related to the language question that I talked about. And here the major barrier seems to be that a lot of people who come in from their various backgrounds, they have expertise. They can be highly educated, but we don't recognize officially their credentials, which prevents them from obtaining that kind of positions and tasks in the society, which could be very, very impactful for the local society. Doctors, for example, something that is almost impossible, again, let's use the Finnish example, to move outside the capital region to remote areas. We have a lot of doctors, physicians coming from other countries, but we don't accept them because their credential does not match. And this is region who is really desperate for that kind of labor force. And here, the need for coordinated goals, concepts between the different governmental levels is definitely needed, but we also need to pay attention that this is a very multi-scalar and dynamic process. The needs at the local level, regional level, state level, and at the European level may not necessarily align. And we need to find ways of promoting integration and inclusion in a place-specific ways. And of course, this is very difficult for policy to come up with a policy recommendation for that, especially for a body such as the European Union and the Common Commission, because the one-size-fits-all model seldom works. The needs for, let's say, a very remote rural area in Finland may be very different, let's say, from Italy or Spain. And we need to understand and get the knowledge from the local actors what the needs are, so we can provide the incoming migrants the means to learn the specific needs and information that is needed for them to integrate better in that local society. Okay, as said, we are just forming our first policy reports now. The first attempt is there on the desk. Please take a copy. You can download the rest of them. They are upcoming now. We are in our final year on our website. that's basically it in 10 minutes. Very much thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jussi, for your explanation and clarifying these multi-level and multi-dimensional aspects of inclusion and integration of migrants. I have a special interest for this perspective. Maybe we can talk about it more in the discussion part of this panel. We'll continue with Pauline Andres de Oliveira from the University of Gießen, who is going to present the Protect project via Zoom online. Her presentation is entitled "The UN Global Compacts and the Rights to International Protection."
I'm
because
here.
they said me I can find you here, but no. Okay.
No.
You have the floor for 10 minutes, Pauline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will now share my screen to show my slides. Just 1 second. So I hope everyone can see my slides. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm representing Professor Jürgen Bast from the Justus Liebig University, which is the project leader, co-leader of one of the work packages of the Protect project I will be outlining for you today. I hope you can all hear me well. If not, make a sign. I will give you a brief overview. Actually, I added yesterday some thoughts that I would like to share with you, also with a view to the ongoing situation. So just a quick question to the tech support. I will share my slides, but will you sharing other slides as well? So you see only my slides, I hope.
No.
Obviously, I'm a refugee lawyer, and I'm happy to talk about the conflict that is ongoing and the challenges we are facing now. But as the previous speaker said, I prepared this presentation a week before this conflict broke out, and have not considered it so far. So the Protect project obviously does not focus on this issue, but still, due to the importance of it, I'm very happy to consider it during the Q&A, and I'm here for all your questions. So just a brief overview on the Global Compact, so you know what the Protect project focuses on, because these are the main focus points of our work. The Global Compact on refugees and migrants exists since 2018 and are important soft law instruments which guide states in the implementation of respective policies. They are based on laws, existing binding laws. They do not create any new obligations for states, but they are important political affirmations. There is the Global Compact on Refugees, which focuses on easing the pressures from host countries. And there's the Global Compact on Safe and Orderly Migration, the first international document addressing the process of migration, which is a process left out also by existing binding law on refugee protection. So let me now focus on what we do within the Protect project with a view to these compacts. Protect is an international research project founded by the European Commission within the Horizon 2020 initiative, and it was launched on the 1st of February 2020. It is conducted by a consortium of 12 partner universities in Europe, Canada, and South Africa, and is led by Hakan Fichakan of the University of Bergen in Norway, who is also present here today. Protect aims at developing a conceptual, theoretical, and methodological approach to better understand the right to international protection as a multi-level and trans-level phenomenon. It identifies whether or how the objectives of the compact and the substance of them are aligned with the right to international protection by addressing existing laws and policies. And so it assesses governance models, social discourses, existing laws and frameworks, which is what we focus on at the Justus Liebig University. I will come to that in a minute. So in line with these goals, with these aims of our project, there are 11 work packages, which are very detailed in their focus, in their scope. There are work packages on the theoretical framework and the legal research. I highlighted it because this is what we focus in our work at the Justus Liebig University and what I can talk about with you today. But it also addresses governance and historical issues, field work in migratory hotspots with a focus on governance and practice, civil society attitudes as well as citizens' attitudes. It analyzes media and social media discourses. There is a comparative study which is conducted in the end, and dissemination communication of the knowledge we achieve, as well as the coordination and management, and finally ethic requirements. So we have a vast amount of work packages, and today I will focus on the legal research which I work in. So this is the work package 2, which investigates the compact's impact on the right to international protection. The leaders are Queen Mary University in London and Justus Liebig University in Gießen. We cooperate with our partners in Canada from Ryerson University and in South Africa from the University of Witwatersrand. Our aims are to conduct 3 case studies or country reports which focus on research into the legal relations between the compact and international human rights and refugee law. So our main activities have been conduct expert forums which bring together experts in the field from academia, policy practitioners, civil society to discuss the compact's objectives and aims and existing laws and policy and their interactions. Bring together all these actors and focus on the current protection challenges in Europe, South Africa, and Canada. So as an example, I want to point out the expert forum we had in September last year, which was a full-day conference which aimed at exploring how the Global Compact on Safe and Orderly Migration, so the GCM as we abbreviate, affects the rights of refugees and other protection seekers. For lawyers, this is very interesting because the Global Compact for Migration was designed to cover the whole aspect of migration, of the migratory process. It is not focused on refugees. That is the refugee compact that focuses on that. Still, we believe and showed also with this conference that it is very relevant to address the situation of forced displacement in the world today, and some also new forms of challenges like climate change induced migration, for example. So we had also there high-level academics, policymakers, and practitioners exchanging with a focus on the issues of alternative pathways to protection, which is also a main field of research I work in, the relevance of the GCM for economic and social rights, independent of the status, independent of whether one is a refugee according to the Refugee Convention, and the potential of the GCM to strengthen the rights of protection-seeking migrants in the context of immigration detention. And some key recommendations which came out of the findings, and as the first speaker, I agree that you have to point to the findings to explain the recommendations, where that, of course, both compacts are important political affirmations of refugee protection and human rights of migrants in the context of the migratory process. However, they are soft law instruments. They can guide and should guide the implementation and lawmaking processes at national and in EU level in the case of our focus on the EU in our research project. However, the effects depend on implementation, and we have found in the conference, and I'm happy to go into more detail within the Q&A section, that the objectives do not respond, and the requirements the objectives set out do not necessarily respond to ongoing lawmaking processes. Almost all the speakers found that the compacts are not sufficiently taken note of in policy and in lawmaking processes. With a view to the EU and the reform of the common European asylum system, we even found that some of the new approaches, such as in the new pact for migration and asylum, even counteract some of the objectives of the compact. So a problem there with the compacts is that they are soft law and they are specific in the objectives, but vague in the recommendation of how to implement these objectives, of how to make them actually work in practice. So what we consider important is to read both compacts together to address the dichotomy that exists between refugees under the Refugee Convention and all other forms of forced displacement that we are facing in our global and world today, and also to strengthen review mechanisms and accountability mechanisms, which can be very effective with soft law instruments. I'm happy to go more into detail in the Q&A on that as well, but have to be put in place in practice to make it work. With international law, it is not necessarily important that a legal document is legally binding, but it is important that there are strong review and accountability mechanisms in place to make it effective in practice.
I want just to remind you that
yes.
I would like to remind you, you have 2 minutes to, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Because I just wanted to say thank you. This is a very brief overview of our project, of what we work on, to give you an idea to be able to go into more detail in whatever interests the audience more of what aspects you might want to further develop in our discussion. And as I said, I'm also happy to respond to questions with a view to the Ukraine conflict, but however, I apologize that it was beyond the scope of my task here today to represent the Protect project. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pauline, for your presentation. Our next speaker, of course. Yeah, our next speaker is Professor Simon Baglioni, no? Oh, from the University, the Università di Parma. He's going to talk about European labor markets and migration.
Yeah, serious.
Yeah, the floor is yours for 10 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm representing as well an Horizon 2020 project called Sirius, for which I was the coordinator. Sirius has also ended a few months ago, so we're very grateful to have the opportunity to be here and still speak about the project, which provide evidence that the project doesn't really end when its administrative end occurs. Now, a quick, so which, it's this one, sorry. So what is Sirius about? What was Sirius about? So Sirius was funded to investigate specifically the difficulties or the, let's say, the positive solutions that our societies created to facilitate labor market integration of a range of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, but also, let's say, so-called economic migrants or students willing to pursue a career in a country of the EU, and we focused on third country nationals. So basically we responded to a call by the EU to investigate the reasons behind different capacities and different outcomes in terms of labor market performance that we are all aware of, which are particularly, let's say, negative or unfortunate for specific type of migrants, namely those who seek in Europe, and not only Europe, humanitarian protection. We did, as I suppose, all EU-funded projects, a lot of research, mixed methods. So we interviewed experts, we interviewed migrants, we did policy and legal documents analysis, we invested time in discussing with policymakers at local, national, and supranational level, but we also invested quite a lot of energy in producing audiovisual material, a documentary, which is still online on our website, in which we've asked migrants who succeeded in their labor market adventure in Europe to tell their story. So you will find story of success, and we've chosen stories of success, also going back to what Jussi was saying before, because we thought that we should also play a role in telling a different story about migration. So we were interested in investigating problems, issues related with labor market, but also we are all aware that there are very successful migrant stories also when you look at labor market or businesses. So we wanted to provide these stories and give people a voice and a face, and they've accepted across Europe to provide their stories. So you will find this story on the documentary, which is coupled with what local entrepreneurs think about themselves, about the migrants working in their country or working with them in some cases. We have also developed an app which is called Workin, which you can download on your mobile phone, or it works only on Android phones, which is a serious game trying to support newcomers learning about their country environment for job purposes. So we've developed this with a company working on gamification of various, let's say, aspects of our society. And we thought developing it not as a simple app providing information, but really as a training, as a game, which allows people to train into a learning process, focusing not only on the specific issues that you need to be aware of to get a job in a European country, but also focusing a lot on so-called soft skills. So we developed the app with the help of the people we interviewed among experts, with migrants, and we designed it before COVID came in, and we then used with several NGOs as a way to strengthen, actually not to replace, but to strengthen their training for migrants, training who could not be run in face-to-face. The project ran in Denmark, Switzerland, the Czech Republic, Greece, Finland, Italy, the UK, plus the EU level. As the earlier project, we also lasted for 3.5 years because we requested an extension due to COVID. Now, very quickly, how did we approach the barriers and the labor market? We looked at 3 set of factors, specifically factors, or if you like in the jargon, 3 set of variables, explaining barriers or actually enablers, because factors that are located in these 3 spheres, legal policy factors, societal factors, or individual factors may be barriers, but they may also be, as we all know, enabler, right? Depending on the policy we have, depending on the type of, let's say, societal infrastructure, the individual characteristics, obviously we might have an outcome which is successful, between brackets, or an outcome which is not. So in the legal policy barriers, we investigated policies, legal, let's say, prescriptions. At societal barriers, we focused on the role of civil society and unions and employers' organizations. So we wanted to investigate, for example, whether social dialogue and social partnerships would be a tool helpful to ease access to the labor market. And then we look at the individual level barriers and enablers, so how individual characteristics do cope and combine to facilitate one outcome versus the other. Now, I have very few minutes, so I just decided to focus on a couple of issues and policy, let's say, recommendations. I'll start with this, which is quite important. So at the legal policy barriers level, what we found was a plethora of legal, let's say, instruments and definitions or statuses, if you like, visas in the jargons, which, let's say, dissect the migration phenomenon or migrants' lives into very specific cases, which, on the one hand, let's say, freeze the individual in that status forever. If you come as a humanitarian migrant and you get a status, one among the many that you may have within the umbrella of the humanitarian, let's say, migration, you would stay in there for almost forever, we would say, if not forever, with all the, let's say, all the difficulties that this implies for everyday life of people, in terms of capacity to project themselves in the future, but in terms also of other people and potential employers' perception. So if you get a job as a refugee, you should be able to change your legal status into something which gives you and the perception of others around you a more stable and, let's say, long-term capacity to project yourself in this country or in the country where you go. This isn't possible in most of our countries. It is not in any of the countries we did study in Sirius. The other very important issue that especially my legal colleagues, scholars, this was a work package led by my legal colleagues, what was quite striking and should really be a reason of concerns for policymakers, for the commissions and the parliament, was that this complexity of legal statuses which decomposes the migration, let's say, constellation, produces the lack of predictability of the law and gives let's say, of the outcome and the set of rights that go with each statuses, which is the basic, obviously, of the rule of law and our democracies, and leave a lot of room of maneuver for interpretation and implementation of the specific regulation to civil servants, street-level bureaucrats, and so on. And this is really a vulnus of our society. So politically, there should be an intervention to limit the complexity of the legal statuses. If you, for those of you who are interested, you can read one of our report on this, and you will see how many laws in the last 15 years in our countries have been produced to, let's say, rule over migration statuses, each of one modifying one aspect, each of one creating a further layer of complexity. So less complexity, strengthen law predictability by reducing complexity, and make status changes or visa changes more, let's say, possible. The other big chunk which I want to say is related to the asylum seekers accessing the labor market. As we know, in Europe, each country goes its way in terms of how long they have to wait to get into the labor market, which is something really deterring their entrance in the labor market. I was living in the UK until a couple of years ago, and in the UK, you have to wait 1 year, plus you can enter the labor market only if you're, let's say, you have skills matching a very specific set of skills, which implied that asylum seekers had to wait for 2, 3, 4, even more years before getting into the labor market, with all the consequences this has on their, let's say, self-esteem, on their skills deterioration, and so on. So we get into a vicious circle here, which we need to break out. I don't have the time to go into the other issues, but I'm happy to discuss this in the discussion. Perhaps another important policy recommendation is to really focus and strengthen social dialogue. So the joint work of employers, organizations, and unions, where that is even an institutional process, like in Nordic countries, should be strengthened and further. We have really been finding very, very few evidence of social dialogue happening on labor market integration of migrants. It happens across a range of topics, but not that much in here, while this could be a very important instrument also to mitigate the polarization that migrants migration might create in the labor market. and I'll stop here because my time is finished. For those who are interested, we have our first open access book, which investigates the legal aspects and the policy aspect, which is published by Springer, so you can download it for free on Springer website, and 2 more are coming in the coming months. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Dear Ricardo, from the University of Sagan, you are our last speaker. You will be talking about Welcoming Spaces project, and your presentation is entitled Policies and Governance in Building Welcoming Spaces. No? You will have the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm representing the Welcoming Spaces project. In fact, I'm not so old in the project. I entered last June. I'm University of Siegen. Our coordinator university is in Utrecht in the Netherlands, but we have a pool of universities and NGOs that we are working together. So we have the University of Warsaw in Poland, we in Siegen, Utrecht in the Netherlands, Bologna in Italy. Also in Spain, we have La Coruña University. Also, they are all involved in this project. This afternoon, Annelies Zomers is going to present a talk in the panel, and I'm not going to present exactly in depth the Welcoming Spaces project, but just saying a few words that we work with regions, shrinking regions, and their initiatives, welcoming initiatives, what the culture they have in receiving migrants and in integrating them. At the same time, how the migrants can be a positive, an asset in order to redevelop, bring it up again, those areas, those shrinking regions. That's our proposal. At the same time, paying attention to sustainable development, which is very important, the green transition. And we do this in a multi-level analysis. So we are going to analyze the citizen migrants engagement. This is under the responsibility of Spain. We are going to analyze also the discourse, narratives, how the migrants perceive themselves as well. This is going to be being done by the University of Bologna. And we analyze also geography, positionality, and the impact of the geography and labor market and develop in this redevelopment. And this is done by the University of Utrecht. And we in Siegen, we are working on policies and governance. So, okay, the big one. Okay. In fact, here I'm going to do the case study we're doing in a few cases, but as I'm doing the project, I have selected the one in Thuringen, the state of Thuringen, Germany. This is the former GDR, the German Democratic Republic, under the other side of the Iron Curtain. And we have some specificities. We're going to analyze 2 major areas, cases in Thuringia, and also one in Rheinland-Pfalz, Rheinland-Palatinate, which is in the other side, the West Germany. So to check the difference we can find in those places. Talking about policies and governance, we have to talk a little bit about actors. What could I have seen already there? We have, of course, different actors. They are involved, they are engaged, they have their arrangements, they have their rules, informal, informal. And I can say, until what I have seen, they are doing very well in these arrangements, in this governance. So we have political actors, non-profit organizations, society actors, and so on. The political actors, there is in 2 levels, they are working there. The district level, the district of Altenburg, Altenburgerland, and also at the municipal level. So they are working. Of course, there is still the national level, but the national level, they have established their general policies for migration, the German Office for Migrants. So they emanate the general policies in a kind of top-down style, but at the bottom up, they have a lot of things going on. So a lot of things going on. And of course, there is the EU at the EU supranational level. There are different organizations linked to the churches' affiliations. So we have a very strong one over there is Caritas, Diaconie, linked to the Protestant church, and also from the Society Futura, for example. They are very involved in bringing, each one they complement the political actors, the political organizations' work. So they are very integrated in this sense. And of course, associations, migrant association, individuals and volunteers. In terms of policies, I'm not going, this is just the bigger scope, the context, so I don't need to spend much time here. But we analyze the integration policies, especially the housing, the difficulties migrants face in the housing, for example. There is a prejudice in renting for migrants, especially when they are Muslim from the Arabic world. There is, at least in this region, we have seen this. And so the municipality has taken to itself this responsibility in working as a kind of agency for migrants in order to solve this problem of housing. Of course, the politics about education, language, and so on. And so we are paying attention as well to revitalization policies, which are very well in place over there. But I can already say that in the revitalization policy is conducted at the district level. So there is the economic and development manager. He conducts those policies, but I haven't seen a special place for migrants in the policy. I haven't seen that. Of course, more informally, they try to bring the migrants in and solving the different problems the migrants face, and they face quite a few problems. The first one, of course, is language. And also because of the political context, the migrants, the employers, they also suffer pressure from the right-wing people, right-wing parties, right-wing, not the party itself, but people who vote for the right-wing. So this is just, the right-wing is represented by AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, and they are increasing very fast. And we have seen already reflect on that thing on the field for migrants policies and so on. So they got 29% when the first vote, means when the people vote for one candidate. So the representative of that area to the German parliament is from the AfD nowadays, because he gained to 29%. And the vote for the party, the second vote, they got 28.1%. So we have seen here how the other parties, Merkel's party, CDU, was in the past, last election, and now this one, coming down. The Social Democratic Party increased quite a lot, but behind AfD. So this is, and the political context, but there is already interference, there is already, we can feel on the field. One thing, some of the organizations, they are receiving less money already because they are more powerful in the state parliament. So governance, as my time is very short, I'd like to stress that I saw a lot of trust between the different actors. This trust is the linking element between all the different levels and that. There are network formed, different networks. I could see one major network, but there are three, in fact. And there's high level of trust, and also produce a high level of governance capacity. On the other hand, I could see also that in terms of policy, there is no much terms of how the policies are implemented, the result. The evaluation of policies is something, a weak point maybe. So regarding policies, the implementation is quite decentralized. Employment hardship, that's a question. The political climate is there, and there is a mismatch between what European Union has in its deep values, humanitarian values regarding migrants, and also the securitized EU also we can see, which is a problem. And those right-wing people, they feel they are behind this securitized European agenda, which is apprehend, detain, report, and so on. So recommendations. In my last minute, we think that European Union and the countries should substitute the randomized and quota system to a matching approach. In Germany, it's practiced the quota system. Each state receives a certain number of migrants according to the population, according to its richness. The state distribute to the district and district to the municipalities. But we propose matching what they need and what migrants can offer, what their assets, what their capitals. This would be a much more sustainable placement of migrants. We defend also not the word, the concept of integration, because it was said before, this carries on in itself the idea of assimilation. We prefer this one of emplacement, give a place to those displaced and to build their social place there as well in that community. We also pledge for a better communication strategy. We are in a kind of battle of communication. The communication from the right wing and the other ones who are working. So it seems that the right wing, it's winning because it gains votes, and sometimes people don't dare to say the truth. Just to finalize, I would say something. The former German employment officer told that Germany needs at least 400,000 migrants per year in order to complement. But we know that's not true. Germany needs much more. The needs it's at least double, but then I asked, but why didn't he tell the truth? Because there is no political climate to tell the truth. So this is a battle of communication as well that we have to face. Okay, so that's all for me now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe if you agree, we can change the order of the chairs now to begin the discussion. As we, yeah. But I think Lily, I think have proposed to the, yeah. You can come here, please. Much better, no?
We can look at each other, yeah.
We have Pauline.
Yeah.
Of course.
I feel like I'm having a dialogue.
So thank you very much for your presentation. I completely agree with all of you that the inclusion process is complex. I think all of us are agree, about this issue. It's a multi-level, multidimensional. We need co-creativity. We need the participation of migrants. But if we accept that the inclusion or emplacement, as you said, is a two-way process that requires a willingness on the part of both host community and the migrants to develop something together. So my question is, how can we increase the possibility of sharing spaces that allow for intercultural experiences between migrants and local residents? No? The question I have, maybe I can say it in another way. What do you think is the most interesting way to make the inclusion process interactive and participative? Because always we speak about the co-creation, but where is the place of the migrants in this process? How can refugees and migrants can be empowered to participate and be active member of this process? It's my question, and then we can continue to have a debate with all of the participants. But this question, I think it's for all speakers, no? From your point of view, how you can, what are the best mechanisms to empower this process of participation of migrants and refugees? So maybe who would like to begin with this debate?
Well,
We respect the order.
okay, fine. The most basic thing is to recognize it as a problem, because in our review of practice as it is at the moment, everybody understands that it's an issue, but nobody's really doing it. You find this in the EU's action plan itself, where the two-way dynamic integration is absolutely there, and it's identified as a priority, and then it largely disappears from most of the document, and then it reappears in another bit. And you find the same in relation to the overwhelming bulk of funding goes towards basic reception tasks which ignore the two-way element. And so that's one of the reasons why we have focused on this idea of what are the core principles that we can use in terms of developing, assessing, and implementing projects. That the number one thing to do is to understand it's a problem. That this is the big thing that is not happening at all. Second thing is, on a practical level, we believe that voluntarism has a huge role to play. That if you're talking about the foundations of interactions, probably the first thing is voluntarism, and that can particularly play a role in what we think is the really important thing of having a co-creation of programs. That the programs are more effective when the people who are involved, the people who they are serving, are involved in their creation and their evolution. And that goes for both the arriving community and the receiving community. And I think that also fits with wider work that's being done in relation to how to address populism and create shared spaces for politics in Europe, about that we have to understand it's an issue and we have to go after it systematically in programs.
Maybe to think about more bottom-up perspective, no, in this process, no?
Absolutely.
Maybe we can continue with Pauline, no, and then. No?
Yes.
Do you want to comment this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I think the bottom-up perspective is a very good key word, because, for example, with the Global Compact on migration, which is one of our research focuses, a very interesting and important approach is a whole of society approach, which includes integrating migrant-led organizations, civil society, and enhancing the agency of each and everyone, and of course also of protection seekers and migrants, which is a very important approach. I have sat in regional review meetings which are hosted by the UN Network on Migration, which brings together all the actors in these regional meetings, which occur regularly. And it was very interesting to see how the pandemic and the digitalization of communication that is brought forward since then, which has been one of the consequences of the pandemic, allows for more participation of civil society, of migrants, of refugees, of everyone who is directly impacted by these compacts, by these legal documents. We sat there and there were participants from all over the world sitting everywhere, which certainly could not have been participating in a meeting in a hall in Geneva, traveling there to discuss, sit at the table with the UN, with IOM, with all the international organizations. So this is a very interesting component, which we maybe also the others might want to add on that, how the pandemic has had this effect. And it is a component which is inherent to the compact, to the Global Compact on Migration, and which is a focus there. We as academics are also part as stakeholders in this process, which is a very interesting thing as well. So I think that is something we're really experiencing here.
Thank you. Let's hear from Jussi.
Thank you very much. A good question and good comments already have been made. I don't disagree with those. For me, the key is to challenge the fundamentals of our thinking, how we approach the question that you are posing. And I'm going to make 2 points. First one is to try to challenge the thinking or understanding that migration is something exceptional. As the Madam Thun mentioned this morning, it's a normal part of what has been going on for centuries, and it's going to happen from now on as well. So we need to normalize the concept. Secondly, being a political geographer as a background, I would like to make the bold claim that we need to get rid of the idea that people are from certain territorially bounded place and belong there. This premise, to me, is the key to many problems that we are witnessing now. The states are creations that are transplanted to our societies, and where one happens to be born, according to my understanding, is an arbitrary fact. It's not a planned thing. And again, if I would like to draw the border, if you wish, between my own experience coming from Eastern Finland, had I been born a couple of kilometers to the east, I would be in a very different position at the moment. I would most likely not be talking to you here today. But what we are talking about is completely man-made line right there. And that affects my life, but certainly, and I don't want to put the focus on me, but all the refugees, asylum seekers, they are subjected to this fact. And this might be a very radical thing to say, but I think it needs to be said, because quite often we take these issues for granted, and by our own actions continue to enforce them unless they are being challenged. Perhaps this is too normative thing to say in a policy forum, but I think that is the key to your question.
Thank you. Peter, what do you think about this bottom-up perspective or the two-way process of inclusion from your point of view? And
Well, I think the culture of participation, it's key in that from the bottom up, but the participation in terms of including the migrants in more things, in the discussions over their future, and not just give it as everything ready, made up, one size fits all. No, we see there are so many differences. Migrants are not the same. The local realities are not the same. So one approach, even inside Germany, one approach cannot be equal to the other part of Germany and so on. But we have also to learn. So this giving voice to the migrants, it's going to build a multifaceted narrative of their realities and so on. But there is this deeper concern, sentiment of different origins. We can see in the Polish case now how it is treated so much more friendlier than compared to the migrants from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, and so on. So we have to learn those lessons. Maybe the Polish people they're going to have this consciousness that people are people. Doesn't matter the color of the skin, the differences. So such a basic thing, but it plays a big role. So this narrative that we have to build and teach the children from the beginning in order to build this welcoming culture, and not just welcoming culture by itself, because we need migrants in order to reestablish services, basic service, in order to avoid villages to die down, and so on. We need migrants. That's a reality, and we need migrants in big numbers, because the negative natural growth of populations in those areas, it's very huge, very huge. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe, Simona, for you will be a little bit more difficult, this question, no? Labor market and the participation of migrants. I would like to hear from you.
2 points. I'll go to the labor market. But first of all, I mean, to start, to facilitate the, let's say, mutual support in an integration or inclusion or emplacement path, we should put, both actors on the same level. So let's provide really rights to migrant newcomers, which make them subjects capable of discussing on a similar, plan. We're seeing this in these days, that even those who are not, used to peace studies or, into negotiations processes become aware that you can't really engage into, a collaborative process if you stand with into two, unbalanced situation. So I think we should really start by addressing the legal failures of our countries vis-a-vis migration. That would obviously facilitate migrants' engagement, but would also clarify in the mind of citizens, of us, of EU citizens, that this is a process in which there's a mutual, understanding, and there's a, how can I say, not only a parity, an equality in terms of humanity, but an equality also in terms of rights and capacity to be here and to claim to contribute to common, community development. The second point is crucial. It has been already mentioned, the communication. We really need to communicate migration in a different manner. Otherwise, you would never get, the larger portion of the population involved in this process. We have plenty of small, organizations, communities, pilot projects in which there is integration ongoing. Yeah. But these are really, spots around a continent which do not make, the critical mass that we need. But to get the critical mass, we need really to work on communication. And I'm going back to what was just said before. I'm wondering whether, what's happening in Ukraine now might serve this purpose, which may, I really appreciated Rosa's speech and their personal, difficulties to deal within the situation in Poland, where you have, a strong, massive, welcoming attitude, while 2 weeks ago towards other kinds of migrants that wasn't happening. Okay, let's put this aside a moment and see whether, this welcoming attitude spread also in the minds, of European citizens, and allow them to look into migrants in a different manner. Now, the other thing which I was thinking about, it comes from Matilda fieldwork, actually. We work, as Jussi was saying, in remote areas. Remote areas are very interesting, microcosm where you do, this process of multi-sited or bilateral integration dynamics happens on an everyday basis. No, remote communities need migrants. We do, in our case, a study on remote islands in Scotland who are strongly characterized by their nature of fishing or fisherman communities, which is historically and in terms of identity important, and is going, jeopardized by the lack of manpower, which is provided by migrants. So, and then the communities really react to adapt, and to retain migrants who are willing to stay in a very, remote area where, transport isn't there, housing is difficult, and they find a lot of innovative issues, which in Matilda we disclose, to retain migrants. Why don't we make these examples, more visible, for example, in the UK, but in Italy, in Finland, there's a lot of learning happening in areas which are out of this, of the focus of us as citizens, of the business, or of the mainstreaming media. So there's a lot to learn in there, and in employment happening in there. Yeah.
Actually, I totally. No? Yeah, I totally agree with you. Before continuing with other questions, maybe we can open the floor for our participant here. If anyone would like to comment this issue, do you want to participate in these debates, or we can go to where?
I have a quick question for Ricardo. In fact, because it's a detailed question, but it maybe sparks a discussion wider than that. It's a question about what you mentioned, if I understood you correctly, that the employers in the Thuringian area felt somehow the pressure from the AFD voters. Is that correct? Like, it's interesting how that works, because that would be a concrete example for illustrating this resistance to migrants, despite the rational reasons to accept migrants. If I understood it correctly, they would need this labor force from the migrant side, but the employers do not feel free to use this potential of the migrants because of some form of political pressures. And I was curious if you could elaborate just a little bit more in which way that is exerted, this kind of pressure.
In the empirical way, let's say, the employers, they are afraid of their companies be portrayed as a non-German keeping identity. So companies that are too much open to other identities, depending on the origin of migrants, and they are not working also battling in order to keep their identities. So that's one of the main thing when a company opens up its door to foreigners and try to let them or teach them how to work properly and so on. And this pressure exists in some cases we have seen, and strangely it's like that. So that means that it's linked to the nationality, to the deep sentiment of nationality, of ethnicity as well. They are afraid of losing it if they open too much. And even we have heard some things like we prefer to die, that's everything, that to lose our national, our identity, let's say, and to have others' identity or Muslim identity here. So that's the level of sad situation that we can. But of course, this is not everywhere. There are welcoming initiatives, experiences going on at the same time. But that's, as I said before, we are in a battle of narratives. That's why in terms of policies, we have to look carefully on how to strengthen communication narratives in order to win this kind of battle.
Thank you. We have some online question, maybe the first one. Both Focus and Welcoming Space talked about changing the image of the migrant. But who should be doing this? Who is responsible? About the changing the image of migrant.
So, I'd step back from this from one moment. My previous career, or much of my career, has actually been politics, and very much a policy practitioner rather than a researcher. This is an area, above all, I think the research is showing that people change through experience rather than being told. As in, if there's one thing we know, I think conclusively, from the last 10 years of dialogue, and actually the last 20 years, because the 2004 enlargement is a really interesting case, because that's when the borders did come down. And there was tremendous fear before that the Eurobarometer did research in between 2000 and 2004 about, amongst the then, however many, well, 17 or 18 members, who do you want to expand Europe? Yes. Who do you want to expand it to, or the membership of the EU? And there was overwhelming support for Switzerland and overwhelming opposition to Slovakia. And we have forgotten that we overcome these things. And we didn't overcome it because of a communication campaign saying, be nice to each other. We overcame it because we lived it. And it's why is the Polish plumber no longer the great bogeyman of French politics when it's sunk a government and it sank the European Constitutional Treaty? It's because people lived it. And also those who are involved in the public space, when the good narratives were there to talk about, were willing to do so. They were willing to, I would say, actually step away from the battle and talk about the reality, because the reality is that most people are decent. Most people do not seek conflict in their lives, and they have a lot of fears. Like in Britain, the more migrants there are in the area you live in, the more you like migrants. As in, the more migrants there are in your area, the more likely you are to have voted against Brexit. And that is the thing which you find everywhere. I live in Prague, in the Czech Republic, which has had some of the highest anti-Syrian refugee sentiment in Europe, even though it has amongst the lowest numbers of Syrian refugees in Europe. And the parts of the country which have never seen a Syrian are the ones who are most likely to dislike them. So I think it's about, ultimately you change the image by experience, and that is why we really do emphasize this idea of saying we need to build into every single element of our integration work quality interactions between the receiving community and the arriving community. And there are examples all over the place of how this works. So, for example, in Zagreb, there's one project which we've seen, which is based around a football club. And on the simple thing of, if you stand on a football terrace wearing the same scarf, but you look different and you're from different places and you have difficulty communicating, you're still on the same side. And it has a profound way of changing things. So we would see it, but one thing in relation to communication, which has come out of our work, is that the misperceptions of the levels of dependence of migrants simply has to be addressed, because in many places, migrants, particularly from the Syrian migrants from 14 to 18, are already making a net positive economic impact on their countries, and a very significant one. They're already paying pensions, they're already supporting schools and hospitals with their tax money, and that simply does have to be communicated by people.
Lucy, do you want to comment this question? Or
I would be delighted. I don't think it was addressed to me, but I would love to.
Okay. No, I thought you looking at me, and I thought you want to. Okay.
Yes, but let's give the floor first.
Okay. Pauline.
Yes, sorry, I don't always see the whole panel, so the reactions of the others. Yes, I wanted to pick up on two things, and mainly on the issue of narratives. Within the Protect Project and the Global Compact we study, one of the most important issues is access to protection, access to international protection, which in our times still means access to territory. Both compacts have vast recommendations on how to safely access protection through resettlement, through safe pathways. And one of the pathways which is particularly promising is sponsorship schemes, where you have someone in the whole society or communities accepting individuals seeking protection and sponsoring them. So you have that link, which goes back to what has been just said, to how communities where there are already migrants or refugees living in are much more open, which I can confirm from the German example with the Syrian humanitarian admission programs, which were huge admission programs put in place with over 45,000 of protection seekers coming into the country, or with humanitarian admission programs, which were initiated by civil society, which was composed by many Syrians already living in Germany, first, of course, trying to get their family members to enter the country, but then the civil society in Germany picked up. And the narrative that politicians and the media shapes around this is very important. We have several instances where politicians and lawmakers have told us that numbers are not the problem. Usually in wealthy countries as we live in, we have the capacities, of course, to admit a vast number of protection seekers, as we also see now with the efforts that are being made versus Ukrainian protection seekers. So numbers are not the problem, but it's the problem how it is communicated, whether asylum seekers and migrants are framed as a threat for society, as a threat for our community, or whether they are framed as individuals who at one point in time need help just as we might, which is, I think, also an important point in the debate we are seeing now, that we can very much identify with the threat that is coming from Russia at the moment. So I think the narrative and also the dichotomy problem of framing the good migrants and the bad migrants, ones who wait in line to be safely admitted into a country, others who try to come irregularly. That is a problem which also we address in the Protect Project by addressing the issue of dichotomy between the two compacts, framed for refugees on the one side and migrants on the other, to think them together, which is one of our recommendations, and to really include civil society in admission procedures, which is an important point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah.
If I can, I just
yes, of course.
want to further the argument that was made, because I think this is crucial by underlining or highlighting the role of media in creating the positive image of migrants. Migration tends to be something that is often addressed emotionally rather than rationally. And we can find a number of studies in various European countries that prove that migrants are very beneficial for the local economy and society. And I would say that most people understand that. Still, the approach can be very critical or negative. So we deviate from the rational argument and emphasize the more emotional aspects of that. So what the media needs, in my reading, should do better is to allow the voices of migrants to be heard, to create place for that. Let's say that there's 10 negative examples of migration and 10 positive examples of migration. Most likely all the 10 negative examples will be covered in the media, whereas one or two maybe of the positive ones will actually get there. And I think this is a problem because of the very reason I said, that if the personal experiences are lacking, as is often the case with many people, where do we get the information from? We get it usually from the media. And to give a very drastic example, think about the so-called yellow press, for example, especially the UK case, but I'm not going to pinpoint only that. It's the same in Finland. If you only read those newspapers, some of them are the most read newspapers in Europe. The Sun, for example, how they have depicted migrants during the last 3 years. If this is your information source, and it is to a number of people, what kind of image of migration and migrants are you getting? And this is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Can I just comment on this? I mean,
of course.
Yeah, I agree, obviously, with all what was said, but I think Jussi's point is absolutely crucial, and it reminds me to, we haven't been speaking about politicians, political leaders, which are the primary signifiers of what in the jargon we say that, those, because we speak about narratives. Who make the narrative? The narrative is made by media, who follows, in many cases, political leadership, who, for the reasons also explained before by the MEP and all the reasons we know, are more keen, in particular, many in the right, but even in the left, let's say, there isn't much courage around, much, willingness to break that narrative. So until we get into that point in which we really have a new leadership or a political national strong leadership which embraces a different narrative, it would be very difficult for those of us who preach for a different narrative to occur, really to get mainstreaming. And then you might have the Sun who still speaks about that, but you might have many other different media following on. You mentioned the UK, and I go back to that example because of my experience of living there, where living in Scotland for 10 years, you've seen really the different kind of discourses and the different, because the leadership promoted a very different discourse. So the Westminster, the UK central government discourse has been dramatically anti-migration, while in Scotland there has been a prime minister, first minister, right, who has promoted, and the party has promoted migration as a resource for the country. And therefore you have there as well some of the positions that were mentioned before, but it makes the difference because a discourse entails, also implies policies, so resources that go for integration. And therefore, you really face a very different scenario. Then, we might have different explanation why in Scotland there is much more, support for migration that you don't find in England. But I think an important difference is the narrative that is promoted by the two different political leadership. And this is something which is, obviously behind our control, although as citizens, we should really question our role and our capacity to promote a different leadership.
Thank you very much for your interventions. We don't have, okay. So we can finish this panel. Thank you very much. We can use the afternoon session to explore more, to share more our knowledge, experiences about these topics. This afternoon we will have this space, this time to discuss more. Thank you very much for your participation, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.